Good morning, subject advisors, the teachers, and especially you, the candidates, who are very, very busy with their examinations. My name is Parisa Boy, and I'm the coordinator for economics in the province. Right, today I have chosen that we must look at the exchange rate, as is one of the content that most of the time is not performed well in by the learners as we went around to check what has been done. Right. Remember, before you can start, your frame of reference becomes your examination guideline. So let us just check on the examination guideline. Where do we find what we are going to be busy with on the foreign exchange market? Right, we have the main reasons for international trade, which will be your essay. That is not my focus today. The balance of payment, which was done not so long ago, and then the correction of the balance of payment, and then the foreign exchange markets, as well as the establishment of foreign exchange. So what we will be busy with now, we'll just look at the foreign exchange market, but focusing mainly on those concepts that you are not doing well in, and then maybe if we are lucky, we can also do the graphs. Right, let's go back and check on our PowerPoint presentation. This is what I have just said, that we look at the foreign exchange market, and then we'll look at these different concepts. Yeah, the foreign exchange rate, most of you really do well on that one. The challenge becomes when you have to explain the appreciation, depreciation, devaluation, revaluation. Those are the concepts that you normally don't do well. And I was looking at one of the papers where the candidates were to discuss these concepts. It was devaluation and revaluation, and it was on 2.4 of that paper. I can't remember it now, but I think if I have time, I'll look at what paper that was. And then in the report, national report, it said all the learners did not do well in that question. The same was the report from the province. So that is why I decided to look at these, because sometimes these are also there in your other questions, right? Without any waste of time, let us look at the foreign exchange rate. This one, like I said, you normally do very well in, where we say it is the price of one country's currency in terms of another. And normally this is expressed as domestic price of one unit of a foreign currency. Why do we say a domestic price? That is when we are actually saying $1 to this is so much. Or we can say R1 is so much to the dollar. Then that is when we reverse the situation. Right. You know, these concepts are not very difficult concepts, but I think perhaps the challenge comes because of lack of understanding of what we mean by these concepts. I just want to, before we come to these concepts, go to explaining what do you mean by foreign exchange, because this is actually similar to what you have already done when you were doing your demand and supply since grade 10, actually since when you started with economics in the lower GET grades. Now, what brings this about is the fact that, I'm not very good with writing and drawing, but let me try my best and see if I can do that again for you. What is happening is that, remember, if we have a country, I'm not good at drawing, so I'll just write South Africa here, and then I'll write USA here. And now what happens is that normally when people want to buy, they want to buy goods, say it is us here. What do I do here? Okay, let me just do this and say it's us here in South Africa, all people who live in South Africa. When we want to buy goods from America, we have our rands. And when we have our rands, we can't just go straight and take our rents and buy from the Americans, because the people in America, if you give them the rents, then they'll wonder, what is this now? Because that is not a legal tender to them. That is not the money they are used to. So what must happen then? It means for you to buy from America, as the Americans are using dollars, then the South Africans must first, before buying goods and services, before doing any exchange with this other country, just using America as an example, then they have to exchange their rents for the dollars. And where that happens, it happens where we call our exchange rate market. So it is not necessarily a particular place, because where we exchange the currencies could be at the bank, it could be any other approved institutions that can do the exchange rate. So now, in other words, what makes it looks like exchange rates are complicated is the fact that before any transactions take place, there must be a exchanging of one currency to another currency, depending on who is in demand and who is in supply. But otherwise, the normal laws of demand and supply, as you are used to, are applicable here. Right, I hope we understand each other on that. But now, another thing that makes the situation complex is that the currencies are not equal in value. So the amount of money that is being exchanged will also depend on the value or the currency of one country for another. And this does change over time. You'll find that maybe, as you can see normally on the news, you'll find that they say $1 is equals to so many rands and so on. At some point then they say the value of the rent has decreased, the value of the rent has increased, and so on. That is because now the exchange rate has actually changed. Hence, the value of the money changes from time to time. Right, now that changing of money from time to time, let's just make an example. Let's say, for an example, we need how many rands? Let's just say we need 10 rands in order to have $1. Let's say in order to have $1. But now, if we need, say, 12 rands, then it means we need more money for us to buy the dollar. In such a case, we say what has happened, the dollar has become expensive for us. And when we look at it from our perspective, we'll say the rent has actually depreciated. It has gone down in terms of the value. Now, if, say, for buying the dollar or exchanging for the dollar, we need, let me make it with a smaller amount again. Let me take 9 rand to make it easy for all of us to understand. Let's say I say, okay, we need 1 rand. So it means what has happened here, actually the value of the money has gone up. So the money has actually appreciated because we need less money to buy the dollars. I just wanted to explain that. More or less, if you look at that, I have actually gone to explaining appreciation and depreciation. But now, okay, let's just look at appreciation first. They say here, appreciation of a country's currency is an increase in the price of the currency in terms of another currency. In this case, we have used the dollar as the example. It could be any other currency. But now, what is very important also, or what is key, after understanding what we mean by increase in the value of the money and decrease here is another important element that you need to take into account, the market forces. Why? Sorry for that. Why are we saying the market forces in this case? It is because, remember, we have the different systems in the free floating. Then we don't have a control over the demand and supply. And in this case, because we are talking foreign exchange, demand and supply of currencies. So in that case, the currencies will increase or decrease. But what causes the decrease and decrease would be the market forces. So this decrease and increase, in case where it is an increase, which is an appreciation, then we say there's an increase in the price of the currency, of one currency against the other, due to what? To the market forces, because of the demand and supply, in other words. Now they've given us here an example where $1 is equals to 9 rand, to $1 is equals to 10 rand. So on face value, we can say the rand has actually then the dollar has appreciated. Okay, that is right. So it says here the dollar has appreciated. So the opposite has happened to the rand. The rand has depreciated. So don't confuse the concepts. Remember, when the rand depreciates, the dollar appreciates. Let us look at the depreciation of the currency. The depreciation of the currency is the decrease in the price of the currency in terms of another country's currency due to the market forces. Again here, the decrease is due to the market forces. Very important, due to the market forces. For an example, the dollar goes from 1 rand to 9 rand. And the dollar goes from dollar equals 9 rand, sorry for that, to dollar equals 8 rand. So in other words, we are from 9 to 8. Then the dollar has depreciated. What did I say about the depreciation and appreciation? Then if the dollar has depreciated, it means the rand has actually appreciated. It means when we were buying the dollar with 9 rand, we need less money, if you can remember that, so that the concept of depreciation and appreciation is very clear to you. When there's a when there's appreciation of the rand, we need less of the rand. When there's depreciation of the rand, in other words, the rand has lost its value, it means we need more of the rand. But when the rand has appreciated, we need less of the rands in order to buy the other currencies. I hope I'm hearing myself now. Thank you. Right, let us look at another concept here. The other concepts that learners don't do well, either in multiple choice, in match, or giving the concept, or anywhere, like in our 8 marks where you compare these two or briefly explaining them, is the revaluation and the devaluation. Revaluation of a currency refers to deliberate increase in the value of the currency in terms of another currency as a result of the central bank intervention. This occurs under fixed exchange rate system. Like, let me just explain the fixed rate exchange system. Remember, we said that we have the free floating, where there's free market forces are determining the demand and supply and eventually the exchange rate. But in a fixed exchange rate system, which is not what we use in South Africa because we use the free floating, here the exchange rates are determined. Or in this case, what is happening, there's an intervention. Either it is, in other words, we can say it is a deliberate movement. So the government, through the central bank, deliberately decides on the manipulate the exchange rate, or what can you say, intervenes, maybe that is the correct word than manipulation. And if they decide they want to increase the rate of the exchange rate, then we say it is a revaluation. That is increasing the value of, in this case, in our example that we have used, the value of the rand against the dollar. And then if they decide to decrease the value of the rand, which is what we are using as an example, it could be any other currency, The devaluation of the currency then refers to the deliberate decrease in the value of the currency in terms of another currency. Now, in other words, what we explained there when when I was showing you what do we mean by the decrease in the value and the increase in the value, whether this becomes devaluation, which refers to the decrease in the value of the currency, or whether it becomes depreciation of the currency, it will depend on what causes or what influences it. Because if it is depreciation, then it means it is in the it is determined by the market forces. But if it is decreased because of the deliberate decrease by our Reserve Bank in this case, then it becomes devaluation. The same with the increase in the value. When there's revaluation, then there's a deliberate intervention. Here it becomes revaluation. But let's say there's an increase in the value, but that is because of the market forces. Then it becomes appreciation of the currency. I hope you understood the concepts. I deliberately went from explaining each concept and then going to the increase in the value, but looking at appreciation and revaluation, and deliberately going into the decrease in the value, looking at depreciation and devaluation. So you understand both the concepts very well. I hope we understood each other on that one. Right. Now, in this exchanging of goods and service and the currencies, we have factors that influences the demand for, say, the dollars, and then the factors that are affecting the supply. This is also another concept that learners or the candidates in the examination room, as well as during normal teaching and learning, confuse very much. But when you look at it, it is actually a very, very simple concept, because you have to understand it from the known, and then you can move and take it to the unknown. For an example, like I said to you guys, when we have, let's just pretend you are now not doing the foreign exchange and talk about your normal demand and supply that you know. It means when you transact, you'll want to buy the goods, you'll want to travel around, you need money. You need to borrow money and repay money, you need the money. You need to, for an example, pay for your transport and so on and so on, you need money. But now, like we said, if you need to do all those, I'm specifically mentioning these transactions because if you think in terms of the transactions that you do internally and translate that to the transactions that you do internally, but you are now doing with an outside world. In this case, an example would be America that we have just used as our example. Then we are saying, let's look at it. You are buying goods, but the goods that you are buying from another country. That is why we say you are importing goods. Now, when you import these goods, you need the currency of the country you are buying from. In this case, we have the demand for the dollars. Now, you'll also demand the dollars. Remember, we said you need to exchange your rands for the dollars in order to transact with the other country, or to transact. That transact will talk about all these activities that are happening here. And then, if you want to pay for services from foreign countries, you want to pay, say, for transport, for any other thing, like I said, you would want to travel around, then it means you must have the dollars in order to transact with the Americans. So we are saying payment for services from the other countries. Now, if you want to buy shares, if you were buying shares in the country, you'll just take your rands, go to the company you want to buy shares from, you buy. But now you want to buy shares, but you want to buy shares, let's suppose in this case, from America. So you need to exchange your rands to dollars. That is why we say this becomes then factors that affect demand for the dollar. I hope you understand that very well. My candidates who are about to write economics very soon. Now, if you want to tour in America, in this case, we are using America as an example, but remember, exchange rate is not only between America and South Africa. It could be with UK for dollars, it could be Botswana for pula, and so on and so on. Right, so it means for you to be going there and going to a statue of, what is it called? Liberty, I think, an Empire State, and so on and so on. You want to see the White House, and so on and so on. You want to tour in America. You can't go around using your rands. You must have the dollars in order to transact, in order to pay for all those. So it means, therefore, then, what is happening, that is another factor that creates the demand for the dollars. Now, another factor that will determine the foreign exchange repayment of debt or borrowed from foreign countries. Now, if we stick to our example, it means if loans were created in the foreign country, which is America in this example, then it means you can't pay them back with your rents as they are. You need to have the dollars and then pay. That is why this has to do with foreign exchange. And then this must be done in the foreign exchange markets. I hope you understand this, guys. If you can just think of when I buy, maybe let's take, when I transact, not just buy, because you'll have to pay for the loans and so on. When I transact in a country as a consumer, what activities do? I buy goods and services. Then if I want to buy goods and services from another country, then I'm importing the goods, then I need the currency of that country. And then what else do I do as a consumer? I go to use transport, go to school, I have to pay with the money. Then what happens if I want to do the same activities, but now I want to do these activities with another country? Then it means I demand the currency of that country. Sometimes I want to buy shares. You know, you also do buying of shares, I guess, from the different companies. Then you say, okay, I want to buy shares in another country. Then I need the currency of that country. If I want to travel, if I was traveling around here from one place to another, that is short-left kind of activities, I'm just going to use my money as used to. But if I need to do that with an overseas country, then it means I must have the money of that country. Then we call the demand for the foreign exchange. And in this example of ours, it will be the demand for the dollars. The same with the repayment of debt. And you can think of any other activities. And these activities involve, at some point, you'll have to pay the other country. Then we say there's the demand for the foreign exchange or money of that country, in this case, the dollar. I hope the examples that I have made will actually make you remember this easier than when you want to just think of the factors demand factors for foreign exchange, then you can't remember them because you want to just take them out of the textbooks as you have read them. But if you can remember them as transactions that happen on a day-to-day basis in your country, but now those same transactions are happening in relation or with the other countries, then it becomes easier for you to recall this. Right. Now, when this happens, we have the other side where I was always referring to, that the other country, in this example, America and so on. Now, if you look at this, we have the supply factors for foreign exchange. Now, if we are importing from the other country, this country is exporting to us. So where do we get these dollars from? It means they must supply us because we need the dollars. I hope you understand that. Because we need the dollars. When I say we, I mean South Africa as a country in this case. Because we need the dollars to import goods. Then for them to, they supply us with the dollars so that we are able to, because there's this exchange that must take place of money first so that we can buy from them. And then providing services for foreign countries. In other words, in this case, if, say, America is providing us with the services, the transportation, the, what else can I think of a service? Delivery of goods and so on, then it means what must happen then? The provision of dollars comes from the country from which we are getting the service from. So in other words, when talk of supply of factors of foreign exchange, look at this, you say providing of services to foreign countries. In this case, it is the supply of dollars. Why? Because they are providing us with the services. Right, so it's the opposite of what we have just done actually. And then when you look at this, buying of shares in another country. Here, receiving of dividends on the shares invested in foreign countries. So here they are again receiving the money for the dividends. You know what dividends are? It is that amount of money that you get when you have invested your shares. Right. And then we come the inflow of foreign capital also, that if the money is coming in, then they must provide the dollars so that the currency that is being used, that is a legal tender, the money that is accepted as a means of payment, that is what a legal tender is, then it becomes the dollars. And then the expenditure of money by foreign tourists. Now, this is opposite of what we said. As tourists, we tour to another country, that is South Africa. We tour to another country, we demand their currency because that is the currency we must use to transact as we tour around. Then what is supply of the dollars for? The supply of the dollar would be for that expenditure of the money by the foreign tourists. Right, raising new loans for foreign countries, in foreign countries. So it means what here? Raising of new loans in foreign countries. What happens therefore, they are again supplying us with the dollars. I think we understand this very well in terms of what do we mean when we say the demand for factors for foreign exchange. And sometimes the questions themselves are not putting it as general as this is. This is, if you look at it, it just says the demand factors for foreign exchange. But the question paper can say you must give the factors that influence the demand for the dollar, the demand for maybe the pula or whatever. But you need to check which is the country of origin. In this case, normally we use this as the country of origin, South Africa. But the opposite can also be true if we look it from the other side of the world, so to speak. Right. I wanted to talk about also looking at the supply and demand. Let us just look at the graph now that we know what is foreign exchange, what do we mean by foreign exchange market, what do we mean by the decrease and increase in the value of the rand. But this decrease and increase depend on who is controlling it. Either it is controlled by the markets or it is controlled by authorities, in our case the Reserve Bank. Right, now I want us to understand, because sometimes it becomes a bit of a confusion to some of the learners when they have to explain what has happened. It is actually what we have just done in a form of a graph. I don't know if we don't have figures here, whether we'll understand each other, but if we don't, I'll try and also demonstrate this on the page despite my shortcoming of ability to draw and not so nice a handwriting. Right, let me try with the graph here. What happens, remember we said in this case, we are the ones, the South Africa is demanding the dollars. Now, if we do that, remember the graph, sometimes they are asking you to draw the graph. Sometimes the graph is drawn and then you are asked certain questions in a form of data response question for about 10 marks. Then you must sometimes say whether the value of the rand has depreciated, it has appreciated, and how much of the quantity is required, and so on and so on. Maybe if we can just briefly explain the graph, then you'll be able to do that with the different graphs, because the amounts will differ from graph to graph and the quantity will differ from graph to graph. Let's just look at the graph. Remember to label your axis. Right, on your vertical axis, on this axis, you must indicate that is the rand per dollar. And sometimes they just write there the price of dollars. So it means at this amount of rands, we can buy the dollars. And here it is the quantity of dollars. Let me just go back to what you know. What you know in your demand and supply, you'll normally have the price of the goods and the quantity of goods that will be demanded at a given price. You know that. But now, we said here we must first talk about exchanging the money before we can even talk the goods and services. So now here, instead of having the price of the rand as it is, because it is the exchange rate, we say this will then be illustrating the price of the dollar. How much of the dollars do we need in order to have so many quantities of the dollars? Right. You know that normally when you are here, I hope you can see that. Let me just see if, okay, let me see if I can have, no, it's fine, I can't find that. It's fine, I can't find the pointer. It's fine, let me just use the cursor to do that for now. We were here, at this price, we'll have the price of the dollars, the rand against the dollar, and the quantity demanded will be here. We know that whenever the demand and supply are equal, in other words, the suppliers are willing to supply at a particular price a certain amount of quantity, and the demand is the demand at the same price of the same quantity. We normally call that our equilibrium point. Now here it means this demand curve actually signifies the amount of the quantity of dollars we are willing to take at a particular price. And then this one, the supply curve actually signifies the quantity of dollars at a particular price that country is willing to offer or to supply. In this case of our own example now will be the quantity of dollars the Americans are willing to supply at these different prices. I hope that is very clear. Now, what we said earlier was, if we go down, if we suppose this was, let's make use of money, for example, if this was then 10 rand, if we decide that, and the cursor is making me struggle a little, from the 10 rand to the 9 rand, remember you're going down, what is happening then? We say the value of the rent has actually increased. And when the value of the rent has increased, then it means we can buy more. Can you see our quantity will be above this quantity? It will be somewhere here. Remember, it must hit where our demand curve is, so it will be here. So it will be, say, more than, if this was 100, it will be more than 100, 120, and so on. But anything above 100. And if, say, the value of the rent against the dollar is now at, if we said this was 10 rand, we said this was 9 rand, let's make this one 11 rand. Then it means for us to buy, let me point the cursor here, and then for us to buy, it means we now must pay, instead of 10 rand, we must pay 11 rand. Then it means the quantity that will be bought, can you see my cursor moving? It hits the demand, and then if we go down to the quantity, I'm not so good with this, and then it's at the demand, we go down, our quantity will be here. So in your different questions, they will be giving you the actual quantities. So if, like we said, this quantity here will be 100, it means if we move from 10 rand to 11 rand, less quantities will be bought. So it will be anything below 100. It may be 80, 70, I don't know what quantity the examiner might put there. So that is what then will be happening. But from 10 rand to 11 rand, we actually say the rent has actually lost its value. It has depreciated because now we need more money, like I explained to you. Right, I hope you understand this concept, because sometimes candidates confuse going down as having less and going up as having more, whereas the opposite is actually happening. When we go up, we need more. When we need more, then it means the value has decreased. Right, and then there's this space in between here. If you look at 11 rand that I made use as an example, we are demanding this quantity of dollars. But because we said this is the supply of dollars, anything above this then becomes what the Americans or what the other country, even if it's not America, are willing to supply at this price. But that is not what we want. Therefore, this becomes an excess supply. And when we move from, let's make use of the amount we made, 10 rand to 9 rand, if we move from 10 rand to 9 rand, then, it means what happens? They are willing to supply this much quantity at this price, but we are willing to have so many dollars at the price of 9 rand. So what happens? The demand, look at this. Here is the demand. Look at the supply. There is the supply. So whatever is here becomes an excess demand. What is excess demand? The demand is more than the supply. And if you go back from what you were doing in your grade 10, what did we say? At a lower price, what do? You buy more. At a higher price, you buy less. But the suppliers, what do? At a higher price, they give more. At a lower price, they give less. That is exactly what is happening here. Just that now we involve the foreign exchange, which just makes it a bit complex, if not well explained. I hope you understand that. Right, I don't think, let's just see if we can look at a few of the examples. I also wanted to look at the activities here and see if perhaps we can look at, this is the one that I said when I looked at, remember whenever we look at the content, we also look at the diagnostic report and check how did the learners perform in this question. Are they doing well in the question and so on? And if there were mistakes, what kind of mistakes the learners made or the candidates in the case of a final examination, the NCS examination. Right. The question here said, compare the free floating exchange rate system with the managed floating exchange system. Remember the free floating, the one that is the one where we use the depreciation and appreciation, where we have the forces of the demand and supply at play. But the managed floating exchange rate, we have it floating, but it is managed because it can just sometimes get out of hand. So it is not fixed, but it is just managed to have it under control by, say, buying the currencies of the other countries, right? Okay, I'm just talking too much now. Let us look at what the marking guideline actually says, or what you were expected to have said if you were to compare the free floating and the managed floating. Here it says the free floating exchange rate system. Free floating can be defined as the exchange rates which are determined by the market forces. We have already said that. And then they work automatically. Remember, if imports increase and the demand for the foreign exchange increases, the currency depreciates as a result of the market forces. You need to say such. Depreciation makes a country's imports more expensive and exports cheaper. Imports decrease and exports increase, and the currency appreciates as a result of the working of the market forces. South Africa has a free-floating exchange rate system. These equilibria, you know that imbalances are automatically corrected by the market forces. Right, and then under managed floating exchange rate, a system where central banks intervene in the exchange rate market, stabilizing the country. What happens? There's intervention in this one. Central banks use their reserves to influence the exchange rate. You know the reserves, the amount of money that they have. When the value of the currency declines or depreciates, the central bank will sell currencies in the market to increase the demand and the price exchange rate. This is exactly what we said. Sorry for that. When the value of the currency declines, what happens? We are saying now the money is now from what? Let's make use of the example that we made. From 10 to 11. The bank will sell the currency in the market. So they sell the dollars or whatever, and then that increase the demand for the price. The demand and the price, sorry. That is what we said. Over a long time, currencies have to find their equilibrium levels. They have to go back to equilibrium position. Right, I think more or less you understand these two. Sorry for breaking. And then another thing that perhaps we need to talk about. Hopefully you have understood the exchange rate. I'm sorry for this. You have understood the exchange rate. If we come here, for an example, remember we said we have illustrated the concept of demand and supply, and we have illustrated the equilibrium, and we have also illustrated when the currency depreciates, and when the currency depreciates, and when the currency appreciates. Look at what I'm doing. When the currency depreciates and when the currency appreciates. Right. And what we have been doing is actually called the movement along the curves. Now, if we have a shift, the shift can be caused by other factors. Remember, okay, let's say now we said we are doing what? We are importing goods from another country. Now, if we have other factors like the disposable income has increased or the machineries, we have a better way of doing things and therefore the economy has increased and therefore we are able to import more goods. And what happens then? In those factors and many others can then cause a shift on the demand curve. In this case, it will shift the demand curve to the right. When that happens, the new equilibrium point is actually established. If our equilibrium point was here, then remember the equilibrium point will be where the demand and supply meet, and therefore our equilibrium point is here. And therefore the different questions can be asked, like for an example, identify the exchange rate system depicted in the graph. You can see here it becomes a free floating because there's no control of the currency, and we have now also explained the appreciation and depreciation. Right, what was the original rand-dollar exchange rate before the demand of the dollar increased? All we have to do and remember was we were at this point where the equilibrium was. Now there's the new equilibrium. So there could be many questions that can be asked. And then remember, this one would be briefly explain the exchange rate, the rate at which the currency is exchanged for another one. How has increased demand for dollars affected the value of the rand? The value of the rand has actually depreciated. Why has it depreciated? Because then what has happened? The dollar has actually appreciated. But it's very important that as you answer these questions, you need to check exactly what is being asked. Then you respond to the question. Otherwise, you may know the content and you may give incorrect responses that don't give you marks. What could the Reserve Bank do to strengthen the value of the rand against the dollar? Here they say the Reserve Bank could strengthen the value of the rand by, like we said in the example before here, selling of the dollars in the Reserve Bank in the foreign exchange market to create an oversupply. Remember we said that earlier. And then selling of reserves on international markets. In other words, you're trying to have more of that currency, which makes it go down and ours to go up. That is the strengthening of the rand. Obtaining assistance, financial support from IMF. You know, we have had such a case now with the COVID-19 situation. And then increase the repo rate to stimulate investment by foreigners in South Africa. You know the repo rate is the rate at which the banks borrow money from the Reserve Bank. And when the repo rate increases, the interest rate also increases. But what does that do then to investment? It means whoever invests, they get the return becomes higher if the interest rates are up. Then if the repo rate is increased, what happens? The investors would want to invest because the yield or the return is better. Right, that is basically what happens there. Right, I just want to go back to the same graph. You need to remember, guys, when you deal with this content, the shift of the demand curve can move to the right or it can also move to the left. When it moves to the left, then it becomes a decline and the curve will be here. And if the curve is here, I hope you can see that where I'm moving my cursor. Let me move the cursor once more. If there's a shift to the left, that could be, especially in cases like now, when the economy is not so good, people are unemployed, companies are also closing, and less imports because the situation, our growth is very low because of the situation, then we import less and so on and so on. Then the curve can shift from the original to anywhere under there and here. Then if it shifts to here, I hope you can see that. How can I do this? Let me see. Okay, I won't be able to draw on this one quickly. It can shift down here, then it means what will happen to the quantity. The quantity was originally here. So the quantity will be anywhere under Q1. The quantity will be anywhere somewhere here where it is on the new demand curve. The same with the supply. The supply can shift to the right or to the left. If the supply shifts to the right, you must check here. Can you see my cursor? I hope you can see my cursor. Then let's have our imaginary supply curve here. If our imaginary supply curve here, what happens? The original equilibrium was here, but the original equilibrium will be somewhere here. What does that mean? If the supply curve shifts to the right, it means the quantity of dollars supplied will increase, because what supply means is the supply, the willingness of the other country, in this case of America, to supply the dollars. And if they are willing to supply more dollars, then the curve will shift to the right. If they reduce the dollars that they are willing to supply to the country for a number of reasons, loss in what do we call this, interest or confidence and so on, because of political situations or any other situation, and they are not exporting more to the country, instability of any other situation, then the supply curve will shift. I'm using the word shift. Remember the difference between shift and movement. It will shift to the left. And when it shifts to the left, it will be anywhere this side. And when it is here, let us look at where originally was there, quantity here. But if our curve is this side, what has happened? If the supply has shifted to the left, it will be the quantity supplied will be somewhere, it will be somewhere less than Q1. It will be this side. And therefore, you must be able to answer questions. When the supply of dollars has shifted to the left, then you can look at the graph, look at the figures that are there, and be able to respond accordingly. So I've just tried to cover everything that has to do with the graph, so that when you get the questions, you are able to understand. Because in economics, really, basically all you have to do is to know your content, understand your content, and very important, respond to the question as per question requirement. If you answer the question but you are giving us the correct information incorrectly, not responding to the question, then you lose a lot of marks. But remember, whatever you did must be the basis to give you your ability to reason and to respond in a case where all else fails. And let us, without going too much on this graph, there's another graph, the one that we did before. Let's just go quickly back to see what was happening before this one. Remember, on that other one, it was actually showing the shift to the right of the demand curve. And then we did some observations there. And then before I just explained the shift of everything else, if you look at this 2.4, I think it was of last year, there was a shift of the supply. Remember what I said? Originally, we had the quantity of the yuan here against the price, or against the rand, the price of yuan in terms of the rand. So what has happened when this shifts? What happens? It was to the right, like I said. Can you see the quantity of the Chinese yuan that was expected was 100, and therefore it becomes 150, meaning they are willing to supply more. And then we have also looked at the factors that can be causing that. If there's confidence and more stability in South Africa, and they're willing to trade with South Africa, and therefore they are willing to supply more of their currency. And the South Africans can go and travel there, and therefore they are willing to give them their money in order for the South Africans to tour in their country. So they say here, analyze the impact of the devaluation of the rand on the economy. So whenever you have this, you see that it will affect the economy positively if the currency is devaluated. Okay, I don't want to go to this question because remember we said in South Africa we use a free floating. So if it is free floating, therefore it will appreciate or depreciate. And then devaluation, as we have already explained, would be due to authorities' intervention. Right, but more or less you can see what is expected of you in answering of the different questions. Of interest, I just want to look at, remember, in this case, you are looking at this exchange from our side as South Africans with the America, but we can also look at it from the other side, from the other country's side to our side. What do I mean by that? We can look at the exchange rate as a dollar to the rand, or we can look at the exchange rate as the rand to the dollar. But when you do that, you'll find that 1 rand will be equals to 0, I don't know how many after the decimal before we talk about the dollar, 0, something cents. That is how it will normally happen. So, but that is also possible. 1 rand to the dollar or the dollar to the rand. That is why in this case we had 2 graphs. Right, guys, I hope you are prepared to decide. You have decided also on the modules that you want to do, and when you have done that, we are not saying you should not answer the other questions, but if you are focused, you are really going to increase your chances of passing, because then you say, okay, I have analyzed my work from January. When I started, was it January, February? Okay, let's just say it's first term, second term, and third term. And then I have seen that I'm doing better in macroeconomics than in pursuits. And therefore, I'm going to do as many previous questions on macroeconomics more than on pursuits, so that when the paper comes, then I choose. I'm making an example, remember now. Question 1, you don't choose, you answer all the questions, and you do question 2, and then you do question 4, and then you do question 5. But if when looking at your previous work where you have been assessed either formally or informally, and you realize I have been doing very, very well in pursuits, then the logic is you'll answer question 1, which is compulsory, and then do question 3, and then do question 4, and do question 6. Otherwise, if you are not having made that plan in time, you are going to struggle, and then you look at this question, hop from this one to that one, and then you write, you realize you don't have enough marks, you move to the next question, and then anxiety sticks in, and then when anxiety strikes, then you are overwhelmed and you are in the examination room, and there's no much time now to make other informed decisions. Good luck. Let's meet again when I look at just the do's and don'ts when you are in the examinations, in the examination room, writing economics. Remember, your luck will depend on how much work you put in. The more work you put in studying, the better is your luck. You are improving your chances of being lucky. Thank you so much. Let's meet again. Bye.